Do we have any copper coils?
Anytime we can get a student in any kind of a lab scenario where they're doing hands-on, it's always more engaging for the students. Rick Hosty and myself had talked about with his high voltage splicing how nice it would be initially to have more of a real-world situation instead of just doing the cable splicing at desks. And that's what kind of got us started in the right direction for putting an underground vault for the students to be able to learn all aspects of a confined space.
Hold up! We gotta form it in the cable. So.
With this, they get a real-world scenario. You're down in the confined space, you're working on the same conditions you'd be working on the job, and so all the little different nuances that we can't teach in a lab setting, we can teach in a confined space lab, so it's really going to be beneficial.
A vault is simply a large junction box that can be entered bodily, and we usually have large cables, high voltage systems. You find these in cities all over the place underground.
That's the beauty of confined spaces. They're right in front of our eyes everywhere, and nobody knows that they're there.
First ones we want to take a look at, confined space definition.
In the classroom, we learned about the hazardous atmospheres, what their danger signs were, and also how to properly set up and use safety and rescue equipment, just in case you would need to pull someone out without going into the confined space yourself. We learned a lot about the responsibilities of each individual in a confined space work environment.
The confined space in particular is a hazardous environment because there's limited means of egress. Usually it means that you're crawling through a tunnel or you have a ladder of some sort that you have to gain access to, and those add higher degrees of complication to the safe entry and exit of that space. So the first thing we teach them is the safety aspect of how to properly enter a confined space. An underground vault should never be entered by anybody unless they've had the training to recognize when a hazard exists.
Well, before you enter any area, there could be some toxic fumes and gases there, so you want to check the air quality, make sure it's safe before you enter. So we have a lot of special equipment that we use for that. The trade name, we call it a sniffer. So you'll put that down into the confined space, check the air quality, and then once it's determined to be safe, then you still maintain that, while you're working down in there, because at the end of the day, you want everybody to be able to go home safe.
Confined spaces are often full of water. That's one of the beauties of our lab is we made sure we set it below a groundwater table so that it's always wet in there, simulating more of a real-world situation. So our apprentices have to dewater before they can even enter the space. The first step, though, is to get the water down to a controllable level, and then you can actually get in there and clean it out a little bit better before you enter to work. On the installation side of a confined space, the cable pulling itself is where there's going to be a high degree of rigging and more safety involved with it because ropes under tension can be quite hazardous. The rigging encompasses all of the mechanical buildup that you have to do just in order to pull a cable into a confined space or even through a confined space. So our apprentices get to enter the space in our particular lab, and they get to pull cable. They get to set up a rigging apparatus, pull the cable in around the vault, and put it into different cabinets just like they would do on a real job.
Up until now, our cable splicing has been all in the lab environment. Having the lab available for our journeymen and apprentices to get the training that's needed so that when they are on the job, they're ready to go, and allows them to get in that environment and do a much better job when they're put in the real-world application.
We have high voltage cabling that is often being spliced, and we have our lab set up so that our apprentices and our journeymen can take classes learning how to properly terminate and splice high voltage cable in a confined space.
And we're going to show the various steps that we need to do: prepare the cables, clean the cables, prep the cables, and then install the connector and install the splice body to make a complete total joint. There's more and more of this type of splice being installed, and this is a newer version of that splice, and we can teach the apprentices and the journeymen the newer technologies.
The confined space uses both high voltage and low voltage. We share the same world. And so it's important that the low volt technician know how to deal with confined spaces, know how to pull cable the same as the high voltage, and what to do for safety purposes while being in a confined space.
And when we had some of the contractors over to look at it, they were as excited as we were because they said this is something that's definitely going to help them to have qualified people.
Because our trade is so diverse, we don't know from one day to the next what we will experience out in the workforce. And so we try to train our students to be prepared. Confined Space is surely one of those places that you may not do today or tomorrow, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, but it will come. And you will be down in that manhole one day. And to have that training here at the school, I think gives you the edge on what to do and how to accomplish that goal.